Hi, my name is George Laurenti. I'm here to kind of show you a little bit about our payroll system called EPS. It's from the AI1 suite of software made by Gatesoft. So there are different components here. It's payroll, there is timekeeping, there is HRIS, basically more of the administration of the employees, and then fourth, there is the evaluation side. We'll go through all that for you. We'll start with payroll. It all starts from a master file, everyone. So if you go to a master file, start at the very top left-hand side, what ends up happening is you see the information that is pertinent to the employee themselves. So this is what we call the master file. You could actually even put a picture here of the employee if you wish. But let's go through the information that you need to have encoded before you can proceed with payroll. This is a list of all your payroll employees. You can also choose by company, because you could have a multi-company setup as well. But what you need to have done first on the very first tab called Personnel Information is the employee number, the card number. Now, why is there a card number? Because sometimes you have an employee ID number that's been allocated to them when they get hired, but you might have purchased a door access software or an RFID system for biometric or a card swipe. You would have a separate card number for them so you can identify them, and that card number will be tied to that employee number. So you need those two numbers to be connected together. Well, that's in the event that you have that. Then you choose your company, okay, or you can choose the location if it's a geographically different office that you have. Let's say you have one in one part of the country, and then another part of the country, or another province or state. Or if it could be just multi-company. In other words, by multi-country. You have a head office in the United States or Canada, and you have an office in Asia or Russia. It doesn't really matter. So you should identify this particular employee, what location do they belong to, because it's a centralized payroll system, or it could be individual or by department. It doesn't matter how that works. You also have by position. So if I were to click this button here, okay, so if I click that, you can have different positions that would appear. So it's your little list of pull down. You can see, like, for example, a bookkeeper or a cost controller or a cashier or electrician, whatever positions you have. Now, there is an area here that you can add more positions. I'll talk about that a little later. Maybe it could even be in another video on the setting up of the software. I'm going to focus more on just kind of going into the software itself. But setting up is another, it's actually maybe another video in itself. But we'll see how we work out. In this area, this is where you choose. So I can just kind of scroll down. I can choose, let's say, for example, a cashier. Okay, I hit enter, and then that cashier code number will appear here. The second thing, of course, would be the department. You can choose a department. Again, you can choose, let's say, for example, their marketing department, engineering department, admin department. You can choose as well. I'll choose admin for the time being. I click enter, and it's already on the list. So basically, in short, it works that way. Of course, you got to put the date of hire. When were they hired? So for example, if they were hired on a particular day, let's say they're hired on June 6 or June 1, for example. And then you can also put the date of regularship, because depending on the country of origin that you are employed in, it could be that in some countries it takes 6 months of probationary period before you are regularized, meaning you are now a permanent employee, unless you do something wrong, but a permanent employee in the company. But in other countries, it could be different. So that's why the date is up to you to decide. It's not defaulted on that, depending on this. So this is also a terminated date or resign date. If you resign or you are, the employee has been terminated, you can put the dates here as well. So you have a full record of HR files on all your staff from now and into the future. You have a choice here called payroll code. I'll just show you what that would do. A payroll code gives you two choices, one that is regular and one that is confidential. As you can see here, there are two choices here. The choices are, if you're a regular employee, of course, you're just a rank and file, a managerial position. If you're tagged as a confidential employee, that basically means that you're an executive and you do not want your payroll amount to be disclosed to everyone that works in the payroll department or HR department. That's called confidential. So the software has a facility for security. In the event that you do have confidential, let's say it's the president of the company or a vice president, their payroll information will be excluded from everyone who can see it. But even if I have access, and I'm an HR personnel, I have access to maybe edit your file, I can see maybe your address, I can see your name as a president, but I can never see your payroll information. That's more, it's more on a confidential level, and that's what that function is for. Okay, so let's say, for example, you can also, it's more for HR purposes. You can do a payroll grade. For example, what are they, assistant, a supervisor, an officer? Are they a manager, executive? You could designate that to a particular employee for your statistics. And of course, you also have here I just close it, I'll open it up again. Okay, you also have here the payroll grouping. I will touch base more on this a little later, but a payroll grouping is a policy you have on a particular person, department, or a company. Those policies could be how their payroll will be computed, because everyone has different payroll computations, and that's what that is for. We'll talk about it a little later, but you can set up those policies, and this is how you would designate the policy to a particular employee. Okay? So for example, no, not for example, I apologize. Continuing on, you can also state here, what are they? Are they an agency employee? Are they an employee that's been on leave? Are they on hold? Let me touch base on this right now. If they're an agency employee, basically that means that they're employed that is not employed by you. A manpower agency called an agency would employ them, and they're contracted to you for a particular time, maybe 6 months, a year, but their payroll may be computed by the agency themselves. If it's a leave, meaning this employee has taken a leave. So you would check box it if they are on leave. Let's say they're on maternity leave, paternity leave, or a sick leave, or whatever leave it may be. But now they're designated as a leave. So if the policy is that you pay for those leaves, you get paid, then the policy will be preset, and the employee will be paid even if they're on leave. The other one here is called hold. Now, what's the difference of the hold? Let's say this employee has resigned already, but there is a clearance period of, say, maybe 15 or 30 days or whatever your company policy might be. What that does is, if you checkbox hold, this employee will not be included in future payrolls because there's still a time span for them to have a clearance. So that's how you would hold their payroll, hold their future computations, and then once they have been fully resigned and they've been fully cleared, then you would actually not check them as hold, you would uncheck them, and you would also check them here as active, would be unchecked, meaning they're inactive now. Is, for example, if an employee has been suspended, it could be, they could also be resigned, they could be terminated, and there's a clearance period. It might take 30 days, 60 days to clear all their payroll information before they are cleared and their final payroll has been released. Now, once they are cleared, you would uncheck the hold button, and then you would check the active button to inactive by unchecking it, and the checkbox, little box, is empty. This means that the employee has been fully cleared. They're no longer employed by the company, but the record must still stay in the company for future purposes. If you have a union, you can have a union functionality for non-bargain collective agreement, or a bargaining, a bargain agreement, meaning that there's some particular rules that you might have pertaining to leave, pertaining to unions. Next you have, per day, you got allowances. So if their salary is per day, you set up the per day rate. You can see per day. Now, this is associated with the payroll grouping, which I showed you a little earlier, payroll grouping. If there was a payroll grouping of per month or per semi-month, then this will show up as per month. So depending on that grouping that you would set up. But in this particular case, I have per day. You can put an allowance as well. So this could be an allowance of 3,000, whatever currency, what country you're in, 3,000, it could be 3,000. Regarding the hold button, or the hold checkbox right here, this hold functionality is if an employee has already resigned or has been terminated, what that means is that, of course, there's a clearance period, right? That clearance period allows them to process all their final pay, their leaves, whatever it might be, And then that's why if you click the hold, then their payroll will not be computed anymore, however long it takes for the clearance to take. So it's a great feature to hold them until then. So let's say, for example, their clearance has taken place. They're cleared. They're not an employee anymore, an active employee. You would uncheck the hold. So let me just check this as if it was checked already. Okay, you uncheck it already like this. That means they're not on hold anymore. But now that they are not employed, you must go to the active box. And the active box, you would uncheck the active box, meaning they're inactive. So the file still stays in the system, so you can have for future references for HR purposes. Or they might come back to work for you again. So they just check boxes to make them active again. So that's the difference between the two. So what you would place here, of course, is their basic pay. What's their basic pay? Right now, our particular example is per day. As you can see right here, the per day is connected to this payroll group I mentioned earlier. This payroll grouping that I mentioned earlier that I will explain more maybe a little bit later. But what this is for is that, let's say it's semi-monthly. So then what would happen would be this would show up as semi-monthly if you have the payroll grouping as a semi-monthly grouping. Okay, so right now it's set per day. So other information that you would require, of course, is the allowances, if there are any. And then you've got there the de minimis. Now this de minimis is depending on the country of origin, but in Asia there's a feature for de minimis. I'm not sure if other countries would have that, but we will look at that more in detail in other videos. And then of course staff meals, because sometimes you give staff meals. So you might have, let's say, if they work overtime, there's a staff meal. If there's a staff meal every day, there's a staff meal. So you would say here, for example, 100. If you're using $100 or 100 pesos or 100 won, whatever country you're in, it would be 100, okay? Now, there's a function called for COLA, okay? This COLA here stands for Cost of Living Allowance. Now, the government sometimes mandates that there's a 10% COLA or a 5% or whatever it might be, and there's a setting in there for that. But this is how you would activate it for this particular employee, okay? I'll uncheck it for the time being. Then, of course, for HR purposes, you've got here the rank and file. They could be supervisor, officer, manager. You can say what they are. Let's say rank and file for now. This little alert in days that you see on the very far right-hand side of your screen, what that is there for is, let's say, for example, I place here 30. Okay, 30 means that from the date of hire, this will say, for example, date of hire and the date of regularship. This will remind you that 30 days before they are regularized, that this employee is coming up for that. So this gives you that 30 days, for example, to reevaluate them. Are they worthy of being a permanent employee or off probation? So this is a good reminder. It's a great feature to have, because sometimes a lot of companies would especially if a lot of employees, like 200, 300, 400, 500 employees, it's easy to lose track of which ones are coming up for probation processing or probation review, okay? So it's a great feature to have. And then, of course, after that, we have, of course, the employment status here. This could be, are they a contractual employee, meaning they're only going to 6 month or 1 year contract with you. You have a probationary, regular, executive officer, agency, and seasonal, because especially if you're in the service industry, like the hotel or restaurant, sometimes the jobs are only open in the summertime or in the peak seasons of that particular industry. So you would only hire seasonal employees. This employee may be that particular category. So that's how you would designate them. You also have your tax status. The tax status is based on each particular government's mandated taxes, depending on the company. I think majority of them call withholding taxes, okay? Or your government taxes. Depending on the, in this particular setup, this is more Asian right now, but we do have setups also for other particular countries. But this one here, for example, if you're a single employee, a single one means, or S1 means single with one dependent, single with two dependents, you have 2 children, or 2 designated employees. It could be your grandmother, but you must file them with the government, of course, but they have to be mandated by the government policies. But once they are, you would tag it as S2. And then further down, you got married employee, married with 2 children, 3 children, and so on. And then the government taxes will be automatically calculated by the software based on your setting. Okay. After that, of course, you place the number. So let's say, as I said earlier, this particular version is set up for an Asian setup, and other ones have other countries have different names. But this one here is TIN. It's a tax identification number, but every country has that anyways. So it depends on what country of origin that you're from. The tax identification number, you just type it in there, whatever it might be. Depending on the country again, this SSS, of course, this is more a social security system. You've got the pag-ibig, and this says Asian or Filipino more in particular. This different mandated government agencies for housing, loans, and so on. Okay, so I don't get great detail. The last here is PhilHealth or Philippine Health, but other countries have the same thing. Okay, but the bottom line is you put a number of that particular employee for each government mandated agency. I'm just putting some sample numbers in here just for the example, and then all it does is it follows the table. Now let me just kind of go to the table really quickly. The tables of the government can be encoded into the system. What we have here, for example, here is, let me just kind of go to right now. This is your tables, okay? Now these tables are given by the government every year, every 2 years, 3 years, because sometimes there are changes that happen, but they're here, as you can see it, for the withholding tax. In this case, the Philippines is SSS contributions, and lastly, you got the PhilHealth, okay? If you notice now, none of this is editable. You can see it, it looks like Excel or some sort of spreadsheet. It doesn't mean you can edit it. This is for your protection. In the past, this has been opened and you were allowed to encode this yourselves, but there's a lot of things that are moving parts here. If you encode it wrong, there's a retroactive consequence, and it could really mix up your database. So it's better that we would be the ones to update that for you. If you have a maintenance agreement with us, it's complimentary and it's part of the package, okay? So moving further on, that's easy to figure out. So, but we also have another function called adjustment. These are 4 little boxes right here. What these 4 boxes means, if you check box one of them, in this case I'm going to check box the SSS field. What that means is it will ignore the government mandated table, okay? And what ends up happening is you could encode your own employee share and employer share. So in this particular case, I'll put 200, and the employer share will be, let's say, 400. Why you would do that, it depends on the situation. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail on that, but some examples could be, maybe you under-deducted or you over-deducted accidentally. You had the wrong setting for them. This is one way to make up for that difference or to take back what it should not have been taken from them to begin with. Or, for example, you have a special arrangement with that particular employee. They want you to deduct more than what the government asks you to be deducted. For whatever reason, we do not know why. Okay? Now, moving further on, you place the account number of that employee as well. So this is for if you're paying your employees by ATM, you're not giving them cash, it'll automatically deposit it into that account based on the bank file that you have to give to the bank. Okay? And then of course here you can place here what kind of bank it is. Okay? What is the name of the bank? If the bank is, let's say, in this particular country, we have a BPI for Bank of the Philippines and so on. If you're in Canada, you might have Toronto Dominion Bank, might have Royal Bank. It depends on what bank you're using or what country that you're in. You have these other little check boxes here. Let me cover them really quickly. This is called minimum wage earner checkbox. What that is, for example, on my left side here, minimum wage earner. In the Philippines especially, because it's an archipelago of different islands all spread out throughout the whole entire ocean here, each region has different minimum wage, because depending on if you're closer to the metropolis of Manila, you get a higher wage than if you're into more the provincial setting. The wage is a little bit lower as a standard government mandated salary amount. So in the Philippines in particular, there is a minimum wage earner rule, meaning if you make minimum wage, there is no tax That's why it's very vital. If this particular employee is a minimum wage earner, you must click checkbox minimum wage earner. That will exclude them from the taxes to be deducted. That's all it is. And then next you have your disregard lates in minutes. As you can see here, disregard lates in minutes. What that is, for example, let's say I check box like I just did now, and I have, let's say, 15 minutes, or you have 20 minutes. You're now programming the software to do this. If this particular employee is late 20 minutes, it'll disregard their late. It will not deduct them from any salary amount like normally you would. If you're late, you're deducted depending on how many minutes you're late. In this case, it will be excluded from you. We have a feature in the software that can make a company-wide policy a 15 minutes grace period or 20 minutes grace period. This is, now in the software, there's also a feature where you can put a grace period for the company policy, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you want to set it at. What this is for, in particular, is that you might have a company policy of 15 minutes, for example, but this particular employee is allowed 20 minutes. So this one will be the exception. The software gives the ability to override that company policy for one particular employee only by this particular feature. Okay? Same thing will be applied in the second choice we have called disregard UT, meaning under time in minutes. So for example, let's say they're supposed to come to work at 8 a.m. and leave at 5 p.m. What ends up happening is, let's say I leave, let's say 15 minutes, or there's a special arrangement that I made with the company. So if I put 15 minutes, if I leave 15 minutes prior to the 5 p.m. scheduled out time that I have, the software will not deduct me 15 minutes. It'll ignore it. But the record is there for HR purposes that I left 15 minutes earlier. That's what that purpose is for. Moving on to the next tab, it's called Other Information, which is right here. This is more for HR purposes again. You can place here the residential address and the permanent address, because sometimes there are two different addresses. You might be residing, let's say you're in Canada, you live in Edmonton, for example, but that's where your family is, but because of the work, you had now taken an apartment up, let's say in Wetaskiwin or Red Deer. So that's your residential address, I apologize, and then the Edmonton will be your permanent address. So you have two addresses to send all the mail to or any kind of issue regarding your HR. You also have a landline number, which is of course your phone number, your cell number, your cell phone 2 number, and then you have a civil status. What are they? Are you single? Are you married? Or are you separated? One of the three that you can place there. We can also add more if need be. So for example, it could even be widowed is another one. Gender, male or female. Birth date, you can put your birth date here. More for the birthday list at every month the HR usually prints out so that they could say happy birthday to you every single time it's your birthday, okay? And then you got profession, what profession do you belong to? And then next you have the leaves. Right here, there's the next tab, your vacation leave or sick leaves. You could also add more leaves. How do you do that? You click this button here, just like that. And this appears all the other leaves, such as solo parent leave, you're a single parent, your maternity leave, and so on. The first column is how many you have. The second column is how many have been used. So you can do the math quickly after that. Okay? And then also you have here compressed workweek functionality. The compressed workweek functionality, let me just do that again because it might have been a little bit too fast for some of you. If I click this button here called Setup Details here, if I click that, this is how you can make an adjustment. What's a compressed work week? A compressed work week could be you pay your employees on a 6-day work week, Monday to Saturday, but they only work Monday to Friday. So what they do is there's a little bit of math calculations and how do you split up the 8 or 6 or 7 or 10 hours additional into a 5-day work week. That's pretty much all it is, and there's a setting for that. Majority of the companies who do that can do the setting here themselves. If there is a little bit of peculiarity with your particular work week, which we have encountered on occasion, we could maybe talk about customizing that for you at an additional charge. It'd be a nominal fee, but there would be additional charge that would be associated with that. Then next, going on from this, we also have what we call exempted from tax annualization. It's this little red little font here. That's more for, let's say, for example, when you annualize your employees, that means, and the system has that feature, you can annualize employees. What that means is every time you do payroll, their salary is based on the annualized tax in full, based on the whole year, divided by 12. There's a little bit of math calculation there. So if you resign or you're terminated on that particular payday, then there is no over or under, meaning there's no over deduction, no under deduction. Because traditionally, if you do not do annualized payroll, what ends up happening is if you do resign, sometimes there was an under deduction of your tax or over deduction of your tax, and then you might have to wait later for that. In the annualized tax system, there is no such feature like that. So in short, you have a feature for that in the software already. The next tab would be, of course, employee pay history, right over here. Every time you make an increase of salary, never a decrease usually, an increase of salary, what ends up happening is the system will record the start and the end date of that salary, okay? Let me give you an example right now. If I were to go to the beginning tab, the very first tab called Personnel Information, and I click Edit, if you can see here, if I increase this salary right now, let's say I increase it to 500. You see I'm typing 500, right? Once I attempt to accept it or save it, it says you are trying to adjust the employee's basic pay. Are you sure you want to proceed with this, yes or no? If I say yes, what ends up happening is it's going to record today's date of when it's going to be increased. Or I can adjust it. If I say yes, I can set up a different date. If I set up a different date, because the effect of the increase may not be till next month, next week. That's why you can set the date. When you select that date will be now stamped as the end date of that particular old salary and the start date of the new salary amount. It's a pretty cool feature, especially if you are keeping track of a lot of employees and you have to look back at the records. You don't have to go through big filing cabinets. You can basically just open it up and you can see it that way. It's very clear. Okay. They also have, for example, the tax dependence. It's here. It's on one of the tabs here. What that is for is, of course, the taxes of government just depend on your dependents as well. If your dependents are under 18 years old, usually is the case. You have 3 kids, 4 kids. It'll ask you for the names, their date of birth. So for record purposes, you can have that available for you, and then your taxes will be computed properly. Okay? And then if you continue on, we have what we call the hours input field. Now what this is for, this is the feature if you, as I said earlier, there are different components of the software. This is the payroll side. Then of course there's a timekeeping side. This is the timekeeping side that's manually encoded. So for example, if you have a Bundy clock, or you have nowadays biometric timekeeping systems, you would print those information and then you would encode, you would calculate how many hours that they worked in a week, as you can see here, hours in minutes. And then you can also encode it here that are regular hours, that are legal holiday, and that are special holidays. You can see here the different columns, because there are different computations for different fields. Now you can also place here the vacation leave and sick leave as well, or whatever the leaves that might be pertinent or be taking place for that particular pay period. Now, that's the manual side of doing it. But let's say, for example, I'm going to kind of join some softwares now. Let's say, for example, you got the timekeeping module. This is the timekeeping called Gates PC Time In. This can either be used as a biometric or can be used as just a Bundy clock by basically typing in your ID number. But what it does basically in short is it allows you to, let me just get into the admin panel. You have to click F3, and I'll just put in the password for now. Okay. So what ends up happening is you can see a little bit of a duplication of your master file here from we set up earlier in the payroll software, as I showed you here, okay? But what this is basically in short is that in here, you could do your timekeeping here. Okay, I'm just going to do this right now for you. And what ends up happening, if you do your timekeeping in your, if you bought a box where you do your timekeeping biometric, or you use this alone, that data can be pulled from the biometric box and brought into this software automatically. I'll access that right now. So for example, if I did that, all your logs from your time in, time out will appear here, as you can see. You do not have to encode this. It appears here automatically. If it's accurate, then all you got to do is say process all and send this data. It will automatically go to the payroll and fill this up for you automatically. That's even better. It's more user-friendly that way. It's more efficient, and you can do hundreds or if not thousands of employees in a very short period of time, because a lot of time in timekeeping and payroll administration is the encoding of the hours and minutes per employee. That is so tiring. And in this particular case, it does it automatically for you. Now going further from that, if the hours are all here now, and it's all accurate that you have validated as the HR clerk or the payroll master that you are, then all you got to do basically is process payroll. You go to the payroll button up here. You see this little button right here? Looks like a little calculator. I click it, and then I would just choose the pay period, and then I'll click proceed. Once I click proceed, it will start processing payroll. Okay? Once I process payroll, da-da, your payroll is already finished. All you have to do now is go to the payslip. If I go to payslip, just like that, and then we go here, I choose the selected pay period, just like that. Okay? Whatever pay period it might be. Let me show you an example right now. If I choose the pay period, I can choose here the pay slip. There's a choice of pay complete, meaning it's a full pay slip, and I'll show you why, because you can also, if it takes too much paper or you do not want that much information, you can go to the compressed pay slip, okay? But I'll choose the big one for now, pay slip complete. I'll choose all employees, because you have choices. You can choose by company, or you can choose a particular employee, but in this case, I'll choose them all, okay? So once I do that, I click preview. It'll process or kind of like do a little bit of payroll like we did earlier, and then you have the payslip that'll appear. This is a particular example that we have right now. If I were to like zoom this up, what you would see here in short is the ability to see all the data. So what you would see here is, of course, employee name, the department, the rate that they're getting paid, their status, for example, they're married for in this particular case. The pay period is up on the very top. And the first column is earnings, meaning everything you make, the basic pay, the allowances, it could be your overtime,